What is up, everyone? We're back again with another video, and today we do have a bit of a first on the channel. I've got a guest on with me. His name is Andy, and he's a bit of a football expert, as he's known on Twitter. He does know his football. We've followed each other for a while now, and his other passion basically is movies. Now, do you want to introduce yourself, Andy, a little bit, and just say when did your love of movies start, and why do you love movies?
Oh, that's a good question. My love of film started when I was very young. My dad's always been big into films, so when we used to spend a lot of the time when my mum was cooking the tea. I know that's not very 2020, but she was cooking the tea. And we used to watch films together, and I just like grew up. And he obviously introduced me to all the classics when I was young. So I've carried it on through to me into adulthood. Really, I still like to go to pictures. I still like to watch all new films when they come out on Now TV, Amazon Prime, whatever, all good streaming services. And yeah, and thank you for calling me a football expert. It is the day job. It does pay the bills, but yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, what is mate? I mean, it is sort of part of your job, isn't it? So anyway, what it is, we're gonna be talking like 70s films today, me and Andy, because I remember asking you on Twitter ages ago, like what your favourite decades were, and I remember you said 50s and the 70s. I'm sort of glad we picked the 70s because I was looking at some of the films, and we're gonna pick 5 each today. We'll both give each other our lists, and I'm glad you picked the 70s because there's a lot of great films there. And what I like about the 70s personally is it just every time I'm watching most 70s movies, it seems to have a bit of a rawness to it, a bit of a different feel, like a rusty feel. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but just to me, perfect example of this will be a movie we talk about in a bit. But how come you like the 70s, mate? What is it for you that does that decade of film for you?
I think similar to yourself, it's very like raw in the sense that it's like real people, and the stories are very like a human level. Obviously now we're very much in the superhero era now, so there's a flip side to that. Films of the 70s were so like if this is not on the list, but Serpico, the Al Pacino film about him being about him being a whistleblower about police corruption. It feels like you're watching a documentary because it's that raw. It's not like it's very, there's sometimes the films don't actually go anywhere. There's not big overarching plot lines. You don't have CGI really in a lot of the films. It's very different. Obviously, when you get to the 80s, you've got more, obviously the second and third Star Wars films and other big blockbusters. But this is like the new Hollywood era, as it was called. It was very much directors, stories, actors, obviously, and that's what it was really known for. So, as like yourself, I love it for the rawness of and the storytelling, really.
Yeah, so mate. Well, before we get on to these films that we're going to talk about, are these your top 5 films of the 70s, or just 5 that you wanted to talk about? Because for me, it's just 5 that stood out that I feel like we could really talk about different things on. I don't know if they'd be top 5, but they'd be near the top for me.
I'd say they're close enough. I'd say one of them is a personal favourite. It's not the greatest film of the 70s, but it's a personal favourite. What is my ultimate favourite film? I think I've said this before to people, so people enjoy that. But they were just films that I enjoyed. I enjoy watching films that I sort of think define. I think it's the 70s in terms of different types of films that were out at the time.
Sound. Well, I think because you're the or do you want me to go first?
It's up to you, mate. Completely up to you. If you want to start, and I'll follow. It's your channel.
Okay then. Well, basically, first one I want to same we've been talking about the rawness of the 70s. I'll start with this one because I think this one defines what we're talking about there perfectly, and that is for me Taxi Driver by Martin Scorsese. Now I just think when you're watching that film, like you said, there's a lot of realism involved and stuff in the story, and I just think that is a really realistic film. The way he's just traveling around New York in this cab, and he's meeting all these different people who are just, especially the scene with Martin Scorsese, just some of them are just not all there in the head and stuff. And I feel like sometimes as well, if you're an actual taxi driver, that these people could actually get in your car at times, to be honest. But I love the character building as well. I mean, he's a antagonist, really, isn't he? He's not really, a protagonist, really. You get behind because of the way he goes and stuff, but he does have this feel about him as well that you kind of like. And I just think it's a brilliant performance by De Niro, and really Scorsese really grew in the 70s with some of these films, and I think this is one of his best, to be honest. But what do you think of Taxi Driver then, mate? I just think it's a brilliant, gritty, raw feel with that rusty feel I was talking about with the filming and stuff.
I think it's the perfect way to go into the list, really, in terms of rawness. You know, if you ever read about it, New York in the 70s could be quite a seedy place, and I think this film embodies sort of New York in that mid-70s era with De Niro and obviously Jodie Foster as a prostitute, and it's a very seedy film, but it's also obviously you call him an antagonist, he is, but you also see a sort of descent into where he's going, and I think the arc of the storyline for De Niro is what really stands out in 70s films, and the fact that anti-heroes, so you get a lot of anti-heroes. I think that obviously people love the film. It's Martin Scorsese. I think it's probably his second big film. I know he did a couple of films before Mean Streets, but Mean Streets, which is even rawer than Taxi Driver. But I think this one really embodies like a Scorsese De Niro film, an overarching performance, and obviously a method actor performance where De Niro went and was a taxi driver around New York for a couple of months to research the role. So it's a great performance. I think it's carried completely by De Niro as a performance, but it's a perfect, as I say, it is a quintessential 70s film, and as it's got one of the most iconic one-liners of all time, hasn't
it? Yeah. What are you looking at me? Is it?
Yeah, you're looking at me. Yeah, which I think was ad-libbed. I think if I remember rightly. But yeah, such a really really great film, and I love Martin Scorsese. I think his films, have been, every time it's one of those things where there's only a couple of directors. I think you might be different than me, but there's a couple of directors you go, oh, a new Christopher Nolan film, a new Martin Scorsese film's coming out. I'll have to go watch that, even if it's about priests in the 1700s in Japan, whatever it may be. You still go and see because it's Scorsese. And obviously, this partnership's been great for so many years.
Yeah, and going off subject slightly, I just want to mention, but what you say there is spot on. When The Irishman was coming out, I was just like ready for that because it was Martin Scorsese, and like we said earlier, this sort of put him on the map a little bit. This and a few other films, but this Taxi Driver, then I think that sums the 70s era up perfectly, to be honest. But there obviously are 9 more films that we want to talk about. So Andy, what's the first film that you want to mention today, then, mate?
I'll go with The Warriors, the 1917 film by Walter Hill. I think it's a cult classic. I wouldn't say it's like Taxi Driver, this all-time great actor performance by De Niro. Then we moved to Warriors, which is again a New York set film about a gang from Coney Island who were trying to make their way back to Coney Island after a big meeting in the Bronx. And it again, rawness. These people look like real people. Everything seems to be real. Obviously, a lot of people, remember the gangsters along the way, like the Baseball Furies, and obviously the speech as well, which is very famous. Can you dig it? What have you not? It's a very raw film. Walter Hill obviously went on to do a lot of action films in the 70s, like 48 Hours. Again, I think this is a really good embodiment of the 70s as an era. The rawness, again, New York gangs, because gangs were pretty prevalent in New York at the time, and again, really, there's no real big actor in the film. You've got James Remar, who obviously did a few, was in Dexter, of course. But apart from that, there wasn't really any big major names. But the film is just a quintessential 70s film, a bit of action as well. But it just embodies for me what a film of the 70s is all about.
Yeah, I remember watching it for the first time about 7-8 years ago. Everyone had already seen it. I remember the Rockstar game came out and I hadn't even seen the film. Yeah. But for me, the way it's filmed, it does capture the 70s really well, but it's also nearly going into that 80s where it's more of an entertaining film, basically. But definitely the way it's filmed and stuff, it is definitely 70s. And there's so many great one-liners in that film. I think a lot of people have this as, if they've done their top 10 favourite films ever, going by personal favourites that they rewatch, this would be in a lot of people's lists, I feel. And when you mentioned the Baseball Furies there, that they were actually quite scary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That you remember people like the Van Cortlandt Ray, and you remember all these people, like in terms of it. I think it's quite a visual film, really, because they go through the park, they're on the train, the subway, and Turnbull ACs or like Nazis. It's fair. I think Tony Scott was, before he tragically killed himself, I think he was going to remake the Warriors as an LA-based film. That would have been fantastic, but obviously he never got round to that. But I think it's just I just love it. As you say, there's all great one-liners. It's very raw. They're not likable people really. They're a gang who traveling across New York carrying knives, and they beat up women, they beat up men. It's not a great advert, but the rawness again of the people, the rawness of the actors, and I think Walter Hill's a great director. He's obviously went on to bigger things, but I think that's a good way to get into my list. Is The Warriors a cult classic?
Yeah, I like it. It's got a great soundtrack as well, hasn't it? I mean, I love the the DJ who sometimes speak in film. I love all that, like. But yeah, it's a great film, The Warriors. So, should we move on to the next one, Andy, or anything else to say on The Warriors, mate?
No, I think it speaks for itself. Obviously, the Gramercy. I do enjoy the Gramercy riffs as well in that film. But yeah, no, go on to the next film.
Before I do, I will actually just mention my favourite quote from that film, where he says, "I'm going to shove that bat up your ass and use you as a popsicle." Is that what it is?
That's what it is. Yeah. And obviously the famous bottle scene, Warriors. That one, yeah.
Yeah.
I think people mostly remember that. Yeah.
That guy off Commando. So so the next one I'll mention is, I'll go with, when we were speaking about visually impressive, I'll go with Clockwork Orange. Yeah. Now this film is not for everyone. It's a bit of a Marmite movie, I feel. I've seen people say they hate it. I think it's a masterpiece, and I do. I think it is a masterpiece. Done me top 25 greatest films of all time when I first started the channel, and this was in it. So, are you still there, Andy?
Go on.
You still there? Yeah.
Yep. Still here. Go on.
Yeah. So, like I said, I've done my top 25 greatest films of all time when I first started my YouTube channel, and I put this in it because I just think it is a masterpiece. And with the Beethoven music in the background and stuff, and just again, he's an antagonist, Alex, really, isn't he? I mean, he's not someone who's really a likable person, which is another example of the 70s. And Kubrick, actually, I remember it was quite a violent film at the time, and still is a little bit to this day. But I feel like, I remember Kubrick actually pulled it off the shelves himself because he didn't want to get any bad press about it. But for me, it's nearly a 10 out of 10, but maybe a 10 out of 10 actually. It's just a fantastic movie, I feel. And are you in the camp, Andy, of loving this or absolutely hating it? Or
it is a bit Marmitey, isn't it? I guess obviously a lot of the films I'll pick are quite rewatchable films. I don't think you're having a date night on a Saturday night, you're going to stick Clockwork Orange on. But when it's on, if you watch 5 minutes of it, you do get encapsulated by it because it's obviously futuristic. It grabs you, the sort of the visuals. And obviously Kubrick's a master of his art, but he also is very, very controlling, as you say, he pulled off the shelves because he didn't want to get bad press. But it's Malcolm McDowell's superb, obviously, when later to be in Halloween. But it's one of those. It's, how do I describe it in the sense, it's not really it's a film, but it's also it's more visual than what's said. There's obviously the scene where they enter the people's home and beat them up, but it's obviously a very visual film, like the imagery when he gets shown about when he's getting what's it, reprogrammed, shall we say. It's a very visual film, and think again Kubrick obviously did 1969 before he did this Space Odyssey. Again, as an overarching thing, we'll obviously mention other directors. The 70s is very much a director's era. Obviously we've already mentioned Walter Hill. Now we're talking about Stanley Kubrick, who obviously went on to make The Shine in the 80s, and it was a time where people would be allowed to express themselves and do projects that they wouldn't be able to do. And I think A Clockwork Orange is a perfect example of why in the 70s, where they did allow directors to do things like that. They don't do this. Imagine turning up now to a studio exec and saying, "I'm going to make this film about about the droogs," and they'd be like, "Oh, it's not a superhero film." They wouldn't do it, would they? So I think it's a perfect encapsulation of like how art and directors moved in the 70s, and they were allowed to do their own projects, really.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, because that is a great point. I think if Clockwork Orange was made today, it would go down the indie route. I don't think it'd get a big mainstream, cinema release or anything like that, especially with all the there is scenes with rape involved. Let's be honest.
It is. It's awful. Yeah.
And it's not something that they're going to put on cinema screens now next to Avengers Endgame in the next room. So like you said, though, it is a very visual film, and I think Kubrick is the master of visuals. Like you said, Space Odyssey, not a film I love, but I can appreciate the visuals for it, and The Shining as well. I done a top 10 most terrifying films the other day, and it's the visuals in that film that get me. So he is a very visual, visually talented director, if you like, and Clockwork Orange is one of his best pieces of work, if not his best for me. So I just thought that'd be a great film to mention, and it's something a little bit different, I feel. So yeah, so do you want to go with your next one, Andy, or anything else to say Clockwork Orange, or I think you put it perfectly, to be honest.
I think it's a good choice, to be fair, because I think to show the type of different films in the 70s, I think you have to include that film because it is so different. I think it was a good choice for that reason. My next one isn't really a quintessential 70s film. It is quite raw, but I think it harkens back to films in the 60s and 50s. It's a personal favourite. It's a favourite of my dad's. It's the 1973 film Papillon, starring Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman. And Steve McQueen obviously was very big in the 70s. He obviously did The Getaway, Le Mans, and things like that. But he feels to me not a 70s actor because you've got Pacino and De Niro, Harvey Keitel, and people coming up. And he's sort of the big box office stars of Charlton Heston, Steve McQueen, and people of that nature. And I think he's sort of a good cross section for that era in that way. Papillon obviously is about two Frenchmen who get to Skull Island, Devil's Island, and held on prison. It's about them trying to escape these awful prisons, and essentially it's about friendship, but it's also about Steve McQueen gets put in solitary and starved. It's a very raw film in that way, but it still has the way it's presented is still, I think, very a 60s film. Have you seen the film, Jordan?
No, I remember you sent me a list, and this is the only film that we're going to talk about that I have not seen. So, my friend in work is always talking about it. It's his favourite film. He did lend me it a long time ago, and for some reason I just didn't watch it. I don't know what happened, but I haven't seen it. But I'm very intrigued to watch it now that you've mentioned it. I've heard great things about it. But
what I would say is, unfortunately, they remade it a couple of years ago, which was it was extremely upsetting. Charlie Hunnam as Papillon and Rami Malek as Louis Daguerre, which I haven't seen it yet, but some of certain films when you remake them are sacrilege, and I just don't. I think what they thought is it isn't a super well-known 70s film, and I think they thought they could upgrade it because it is a great story, but I just wouldn't touch the classics. But yeah, Steve McQueen, why I like Steve McQueen to me is the quintessential man's man actor. He looks like a man. He doesn't look like your leading men now. Obviously pretty boy looks. He's a proper man. And he was raw. And obviously, Dustin Hoffman, great actor, of course. He was in a lot of films in the 60s, 70s, 80s, of course. The method acting with Steve McQueen's quintessential Hollywood lead man acting. I think it's a nice blend of actors, really. And it's a good film. Even if people haven't seen it, I can only recommend that people go and watch it.
Yeah. Is your camera still on there, Andy?
Yeah, it's just going off. Just hold on a sec. I don't know what's going on with it.
Yeah, you come back on there for a second.
Yeah, got it. Back.
Yeah, I've just got to apologise to you and the viewers for letting you run that one on your own there, to be honest.
It's all right, don't worry.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Actors back in the day that were the proper heroes are a little bit different now. It's just the way the world's sort of working a little bit, but I haven't seen too many Steve McQueen movies, I'm not going to lie. I mean, I've still got The Great Escape to watch on my list as well.
Good film.
But is that 70s, by the way? 60s, isn't it?
Great Escape 68, I think it is, something, yeah. So I think 60s, but no, he's in he did a lot of good films and obviously died in late 70s, but again, a great actor, and I think he was the #1 box office star in the world in the 70s, so he'd be like your Tom Cruise type now, I guess, but a completely different type of actor.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry to leave you on that one, mate, but hopefully, I will know a lot more about the next few films, but Papillon, I'll have to check that one out, definitely. So, okay, should we move on to the next one? Thanks for giving the info there, mate. Okay, I'm going to go with Alien. Now, iconic movie. I feel like it's one of the most important movies in cinema history, to be honest. And it's a great build-up. It's got great tension. Totally different to Aliens. Well, not totally different, but it's a different, genre film, I feel. Aliens is more action. This one, it's definitely more horror sci-fi, and it's quite... The first time you see that chest burst scene is something... It's quite shocking, and I can only imagine being in the cinema in 1975, I think this movie was. I think.
70, yeah, late 70. I think it was 78. Sorry, a bit later.
Oh, was it? Yeah, sorry. I can only imagine being in the cinema back then and seeing that for the first time. How amazing and shocking at the same time that would have been. And you got the great, the heroine, the very first action female heroines of one of the best of all time, and Sigourney Weaver as Ripley there. And it's just got I always like the spoilers if you haven't seen it. I'm sure you all have, but I always like the way the android Ash,
Yeah.
turned on them a little bit, and it's just a great film overall. And some would say this is a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, perfect, one of the most perfect films ever made, and it's hard to argue. Really, it is a fantastic movie, I feel.
I think you talked about Aliens there. I think they both represent the 2 decades they were made, and obviously James Cameron did Aliens, more of an action film. The 80s obviously was the rise of Stallone and Schwarzenegger with the big action films. I think obviously that's more geared towards that audience. But Alien is a really important film, as you say. It's Ridley Scott's second film after he did Duelists, which I'd also recommend people watch. One of my favourite 70s films as well. But Aliens, again, as you mentioned, well, Sigourney Weaver, the original action heroine, John Hurt, obviously, with the chest-pierced performance, you can't forget that. And Tom Skerritt's good in the film as well. I think, you look at the 70s, and we'll talk about one of the other films that you on your list and one of the other ones on my list. Horror is a big important factor in the 70s, and I often have the argument whether Alien is a horror film or it's a sci-fi film, but obviously it's both, isn't it? It's both. Yeah. And I think the tension it builds, and you look at, I think at every honest, like we'll talk about Jaws in a bit, but Jaws is on a boat. This is in space, in a confined space. And I think it cranks the tension up really well. The fact that there's nowhere to go, you can't really escape the alien. And I think it's an iconic film. And Ridley Scott's obviously been one of the best directors of the last 40 years. It's incredible, really. Yeah. It is a 10 out of 10 film. It's iconic.
As good as Ridley Scott is, for me, this is number one film. But one thing I will say is the design of the alien. It's just an absolute terrifying creature, isn't it? And to come out with that, with spits acid and everything, it's just But yeah, like you said, it's just one of them. Let's do a film, lost in space with an alien, and it's so simple but so effective the way they done it. Yeah. So that is Alien anyway. I'm sure you've all seen that one, guys. But I actually spoke to someone on Twitter the other day who had never seen Alien or Aliens, and she got back to me and said she could not believe how good this movie was. She was just blown away by it. So still to this day, it hasn't really. I suppose when you look at the computer dials and the computer screens and stuff that they got there at that age, but you could still watch this today and it'd still be amazing.
It's all about pacing, isn't it? And the build up of the build up of what's going on. And I think that's what I think that's why 70s films do last, like Alien. It's because of how it's done. It's because it's the way it's shot and the pacing and how it builds the tension. I think often when now into the the gorier and horror films you saw was obviously in the mid 2000s. I think the way films in the 70s paced much better. I think. Yeah. If we're moving on to the next film, I'm quite anal about things because we're going to talk about the two of the greatest films ever. Yeah. I'll start with The Godfather Part 1, and we'll dovetail it with obviously the second one. But The Godfather Part 1. For me, is the best of the two. You're going to probably argue differently, I'm sure, because everyone does. But to me, and this is a big statement, there's never been a film more perfectly made than The Godfather Part 1. Whether it's the acting, the directing, the script, the overarching storyline of Michael Corleone from war hero, college boy to mafia don, and the ruthlessness he shows at the end of the film, and obviously Marlon Brando's titanic performance as Don Vito Corleone. And Francis Ford Coppola, obviously people, he at the start of his career was brilliant, and then towards the end of his career wasn't so brilliant. But to me, it's just a perfect film. And when people say to me, "Is there any parts from recast?" I don't think there is really. I think you've got John Cazale, who obviously tragically died young, but every film he was in was a Best Picture nominee. Superb actor, Dog Day Afternoon, Deer Hunter, two of his other films as Fredo. James Caan. It's just, and Talia Shire obviously was in Rocky as well. It's just a fantastic film, and it's a story of people call it America's story in some ways because it's about a family, an immigrant family, by legal or non-legal means illegal, in this case rising up above its station. For me, it's a perfect film. What are your thoughts on Godfather Part 1?
Well, I think it's the second best film ever made, but we'll get onto that in a minute. But it's perfect. It is. It's 10 out of 10. I haven't got one fault with the movie. Not one fault. And I actually watched this not long ago because my fiance had never seen them, and we watched the first two, and it was just, you know what, it just never got old. In fact, it's one of them films, every time I watch it, it gets better every time. And like you said, the over arc of Al Pacino in this is the best character arc of any film I've ever seen. Like you said, he's just like this, doesn't want to get involved in the family business and stuff like that, and he just goes to someone you just do not mess with.
Exactly. You know, I love the wedding scene at the start. I think that, you know, that's like one of the most famous scenes. Just the things around the wedding. You've got Luca Brasi, obviously rehearsing the speech. You've got Michael and Kay. And Kay's completely new to this world, and she's very wide-eyed. But then in the other rooms, Don, and he's, you know, basically having people murdered. He's arranging people's immigration passports. He's doing everything, and all the time he's just broken this cat. It's just a genius. It's genius, really. And then you've got, you know, Johnny Fontaine, who's like a Frank Sinatra type person. There's so much going on. I think it really encapsulates, like, it's got, as you say, it's got everything. I can talk about Godfather for days, but what I would say about it is it's perfect. Like you said, it's just a perfect film.
I mean, that moment where he just takes everyone out. The first time I watched it, I just weren't expecting that, because you do think that he's on the downfall. You go with the film and everyone's going, oh, the Corleones are finished and all that, and next minute you just don't expect them to do that. And I've got my hairs are standing up talking about it now. It's just, it's brilliant. It really is.
I didn't even mention Robert Duvall. You know, Robert Duvall there. You know, obviously the bit when he goes to see the film producer in LA. You know, the horse's head in his bed. You know, sleeps with the fishes. These have all become part of the lexicon for the next 40 years. And people still say all the phrase, you know, make an offer he can't refuse. All that is, you know, that is part of the lexicon now because of that film. I think it is probably one of the most quoted films ever as well. And again, please God, Lord, please do not let them remake the Godfather films. It'd be one of the biggest sacrileges ever. You couldn't I can't even imagine who beat Don Corleone, or, you know, some crazy actors who'd be picked. But it could have been completely different. Robert Redford could have ended up getting the role as Michael Corleone. Ernest Borgnine could have been Don Corleone. So again, a bit of luck and the way it worked, and you've got a perfect film.
Yeah, like you mentioned there, Robert Duvall, just as not a side note, but it's just something I've always wondered. Do you think he cuts that horse's head off, or do you reckon he's got people with him?
I think they pay people, yeah.
I don't think he done that, did he? But he doesn't seem to be around anyone, does he? He just goes over on his own, but he must have had people with him, or, you know, paid someone to do it who they know over there, or something like that.
It's the only bit that it just is a bit hammy in the film is when Sonny beats up Connie's husband, Carl, when he misses him by 4.5 foot with a punch, and a kick misses him completely. But apart from that, you know, Francis Ford Coppola, obviously the Apocalypse Now, and obviously Godfather Part 2. Just, I think because he's Italian as well, I think he understands what it means to be an Italian American. I think that it takes you into that world like more. And, you know, I think everyone loves, you know, gangster films, you know, mafia films. You know, obviously Goodfellas is another one. We just love them, and I think this is the start of it all, really.
Yeah, and before we get on to the next one, I just want to mention that the you know, that bit in the restaurant, that we talk about tension with aliens, but this is tension, isn't it? I mean, when he's in the cab and he thinks they're onto him, and there's, you know, the driver thinks there's someone following him and stuff, and to getting in the restaurant, that is a perfectly paced, tense 15-20 minutes there, I feel. So it's just there's so many good bits in The Godfather. But should we just move on to the next movie? For me, this is, look, I wouldn't say it's like way better or anything like that. No. It's just got a little bit something. I don't know what it is, but for me, it's The Godfather 2. Now, to me, the greatest film of all time, the best sequel of all time. What I love about it is, obviously, look, I say all time again, but it's Al Pacino's greatest performance for me. It's him as Michael Corleone. When he's looking at people with them eyes, you just know he's not messing around. And what I love about this more than anything is this could have been a prequel on its own, but it's a prequel and a sequel, and it goes back with Robert De Niro. Obviously, I think he won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor in this. Yeah, that to me, it's just perfect the way it goes back and forth, and he's basically, it's Don Corleone just starting off by helping old women, because someone wants to kick her out of a flat and stuff like that, and then obviously that's how he grows into Don, the Don basically. But I just think it's got everything. It really has. It's a little bit harder to follow than the first one. I think it does require a few rewatches, but it's just total perfection to me. And that's how you follow a movie up, I feel, with that sequel. That is just the best film of all time for me. But what do you think of The Godfather 2, mate? I know it's obviously your best film.
You can't fault it. It is, again, it's another perfect film, and obviously I think the fact that Robert De Niro's in it, a lot of people obviously big Robert De Niro fans, and him and Pacino in the same film. I guess they're not really in the same film, but it's. I think Robert De Niro is Don Vito as a young guy. It's brilliant. I like the fellow who plays Clemenza as well. Clemenza. I like the interplay they've got. And I think as a saga film, I think it ties a bow. Those two films tie a bow on it really nice. Obviously, the third film, because of the daughter, isn't that good? But in terms of The Godfather Part 2, again, it's a continuation of Michael's descent into power and his family splitting apart. So you see at the start of the film, Connie, and Connie's obviously distraught. Her husband, she's going out and going with different men, and there's a fractures between them. And then obviously you've got Fredo, John Cazale, such a great actor. He's superb as Fredo, because you can see the jealousy burning him, good that he is the older brother, and he's been basically passed over because he's not, he's not a Corleone in a sense, because he's not that strong male, which Michael and Sonny were. So it's just perfect. I think at the time, I think people didn't like to touch probably sequels, because these people didn't like to touch sequels because they were, it's dangerous ground. But I think Francis Ford Coppola does an unbelievable job. And yeah, it's not as good for me as The Godfather Part 1, but in terms of what as a film, you're not going to get many better again. It's superb.
Yeah, and when you mention, Michael having to deal with all these family, and then he's got all this other stuff on his mind, where he thinks he's going to get backstabbed by, I forgot the old guy's name in this film. Can you remember it? The one he's doing a big deal with?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I can't. I can't remember the first film name, but the second film is not Don Barzoni. I don't know. Barzini's the first film, isn't it?
What was that? Sorry.
It's Barzini's the first film, isn't it? It's not the second film.
No, that's the first. But it doesn't matter anyway. But the way he's got, he's got all this family stuff going on, and he's got all that going on. But you never ever feel like he loses control. He's always in the driving seat, and even when he loses touch a little bit, he never panics. And again, it's just a brilliant performance. And yeah, so Godfather 2.
But I've just remembered the Hyman Roth.
The what? Sorry, mate.
Hyman Roth.
Hyman Roth, that's it. Hyman Roth, yeah.
Played by actor Coach Lee Strasberg.
Yeah. So I just like I said, the whole prequel side of it and everything. When you said they're not really in the same film, they're not. But I always remember that moment where Don Corleone has got him in his arms as a baby, and that to me is a little bit weird. Yeah. Just because of all the background of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, really. But
that's the conversation, isn't it? The versus conversations. I think that's what we like to do, is debate. As people, like, it's a pub conversation. Who's better, De Niro or Pacino? I always say De Niro. I'm sure people think, my best mate Steve thinks Pacino is, for example. But I suppose they're both great actors.
Yeah, I done my top 10 actors ever the other day, and I put them two at number 2. So there you go. All right, so should we move on to your next film, mate?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Exorcist, the 1973 William Friedkin film. I think, possession films were, obviously now, we've had so many, but the Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby is a bit more subtle as a sort of demonic film, I think. But William Friedkin, obviously on the back of the French Connection, did the Exorcist, and it's still talked about to this day. People said, was it real? People, unfortunately, in the 70s, people thought it was that real, that they ran out to the streets screaming after seeing it, and people got run over. It was going to be banned in some cases. And I think, It's Max von Sydow. I think he was in shut around a couple of years ago, and I think he seemed to be 150 then. So I don't know how old the man was, but just The Exorcist is just again the build and what's happening. Why is the little girl sick? You don't really see it, and then obviously when Max von Sydow finally arrives at the house to do the exorcism, it starts to kick up a gear. Then obviously got the. It's a classic horror film. Obviously, you get into in the late 80s and in the late 70s and the 80s, you get the slasher films with Halloween and Freddy Krueger and what have you not. But this, I think, is the best horror film ever. I would actually say that's the best horror film ever. And the reason being is I just think the acting and the story, and it's just, again, it's got that rawness as well, especially with Father Karras, his mum dying. I think it's just a superb film, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of them, isn't it? You put it on, you just know it's a 70s film straight away. Yeah. But when you mentioned Max von Sydow there, don't quote me on this, but I read a fact not long ago, and I'm sure he was in his 40s or 50s in this film, and he just put loads of makeup on him to make him look way older. Way older. Don't quote me on that, but I'm sure that's what I read. But this is like Alien for me. Obviously, it's not the same film, but I mean, when you're in the theatre in the 70s watching this, I mean, if you're religious, slightly religious, and you're in the 70s in the cinema watching this, I could imagine this to be the most horrifying moment of your life. It's I watched it very late in life, in like 1999 when they re-released it. Didn't affect me as much, but it was still quite creepy and quite scary. But if I'm in that cinema in the 70s seeing that, I don't know if I'd make it through the film, to be honest. It's the religious focus for me. It could be real. It could happen. If you believe in God, you've got to believe in the devil and stuff like that. And it's a fantastic film. Reagan is an iconic horror movie character, isn't she? I mean, just the makeup she's got on and everything like that. It's just a brilliant film, and one of the best movie posters of all time, by the way. The priest standing there with the light shining down. It's great. And one thing that did scare me on this movie is, I think it's when Father Karras is having these dreams, and that face, the demon, just flashes on screen. That's scary. That, but yeah, it's a masterpiece. It is. I can't argue with you when you say it's the best horror movie ever. I can't. I don't know if it's mine, but I couldn't argue it.
The music's just the Tubular Belt by Mike Oldfield. That's an iconic song. Tune again. Talk about it in a minute with another film, but the song is just so iconic in the way that you just know which film it is as soon as you go on that scene where Max von Sydow steps out the car and there's a fog and looks up to the window. That's the poster, isn't it? It's a brilliant visual and the music, and it just straight away what the film is by that song. I think they marry perfectly. But no, I can't. As you said, you can't argue. I know there's other films that are great horror films, but for me, it's the best.
Yeah, that is iconic when he gets out the taxi. I just pictured it there when you said it, with the fog going past and stuff like that. It's great, isn't it? So, yeah, The Exorcist, sure you've all seen that. Actually, my friend was down last night and she's never seen it. So, one of my
actually, sorry, just a point. You made a great point before. I think the people watching it now, it probably, this is a great point that you made, is that they probably don't, because we live in a different time and religion's not as big in our lives as it was, but in the 70s, as you mentioned, it's much different. Society is much different. The church had a much more of a hold on society, especially in certain parts of the world. And I think if you were, as you say, in the 70s and you're very religious, it really hits home. And I think that's why people, when they watch it now, some people might go, oh, it's a little bit hammy in ways. But back then, it was so much more hard hitting, really, for that reason.
Yeah, I don't even know if there was atheists around in the 70s. I might be wrong there, but
probably a few, but yeah.
Yeah, it is horrifying if you're religious, put it that way. But should we move on to the next one, mate? Yeah, is it my turn? Yeah, it is, isn't it? Okay, this is my last one. I think this is another horror movie, and for me, this is the best horror film of all time. It's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't even know where to start. Basically, what's scary about this for me is, you mentioned that the exorcism could be real, stuff like that, but this, if anything is realistic in a horror film, it's this for me, because this is what I think's weird about it. It's just this house in the middle of nowhere in Texas, and these psychopaths are living there, and these unlucky young teenagers just happen to stumble upon them, and that could happen, and they get away with it for years because they're just out in the middle of nowhere. But I just love the way the film starts. It's got a really creepy little score going on. You just see that dead body on the park bench there. or like the motorway bench or whatever it is, just lying there, and the radio on. You know, the fella talking about the radio, about all, I think he's talking about the murders and stuff that have happened, and or people going missing, and it just sets that feel straight away. And what I love about it is the grittiness of it. It's just, I mean, like, I've got it on Blu-ray now, but I remember watching this on VHS, and it just was a little bit more effective. That, you know, it just needs that gritty feel. I think, and it's just incredible. It really is. I watch it every October. It's amazing. And even some people say it goes a little bit stupid towards the end with the hitchhiking and stuff, but you know, when they come back to the house. But I think that's even more horrifying when she's sitting in that room just screaming and screaming. That is scary to me. And she was actually doing that for 24 hours when they were filming this, that scene. Yeah, so she said she was worn out after it, but it's just fantastic. It really is. Iconic horror movie for me. Have you seen it?
Yeah, my story with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because I remember watching it when I was reasonably young, say 10, 11, which is, you know, around the mid-90s, and I remember like an urban legend that it was real. So, you know, for example, if this had been done found footage, I think people would have been frightened beyond belief, because, you know, it is a scary film, and as you say, the realness of it, you know, Leatherface and the whole story is it. And when I first watched it, it was even before I switched it on, I could feel my nerves jangling, because it is that type of film that you can just sense straight away there's danger. These people are dangerous, and I don't think, you know, people obviously, there's like Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, you know, as an iconic horror person. Leatherface is one, you know, the MC where he's throwing the chainsaw. It's just an iconic scene. And, you know, Toby, as I say, I had this urban legend that when I was told when I was a kid that it was real, and I was frightened because I thought it was real. And I think it's, even now when I think about it, I can feel the hair standing up on my neck, you know, because I thought that this was all real. In America, there was this family that did this. So yeah, it had quite a big effect on me when I watched it because of that reason. I think it's, you know, don't be wrong, it's not. Oh, you know, talk about the Exorcist. Obviously, Max von Sydow, you know, really good actor. It's not that level, but it's the reason is it's because you don't know the people. I think it means more. I think when you've got actors in films, you go, "Oh, that's an actor playing a role." But with this, you don't know these people, and I think it works well because of that.
That's what scares me. People scare me more than anything in film. You got these paranormal films like Sinister and stuff, and they are scary. But this for me is, because it's so realistic, it just scares the life out of me. And I just want to mention, you know, that scene as well, where she's running out the house and she just breaks free and he pulls her back into the darkness. That to me is it's horrifying, isn't it? But yeah, it's just iconic. It really is. But yeah, that is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Some great points there, Andy, mate. Should we move on to the one you want to talk about, your fifth movie, or?
Yes, I saved the best to last. My favourite film of all time. And I think, you know, I think a lot of people have seen it, and, you know, unfortunately, people mention The Shark, but we'll get into that in a minute. But it's Jaws, the 1975 Steven Spielberg classic. For me, it's another perfect film. I don't think, apart from the rubber shark, there isn't really anything wrong with the film. It still stands up, and I think because the shark was so bad looking, I think it helps the film a lot, because you don't see the shark fully for the first, I think, an hour of the film. You know, I could go on for this for hours, but the reason I love Jaws so much is when I was a kid, I was really big into sharks, and I'd read Jaws when I was about 7 or 8, because we had the Jaws book in the house, and then I watched it with my dad because he'd been terrified by it as a kid in the 70s as well. And it just means a lot to me, because I think it's the film that stood out the most. I think I've watched it more than any other film. I only watched it today, actually. I just put it on. But in terms of a film, I think you've got 3 great actors. You know, people disagree with this, but the first half of the film, although there's obviously a killer shark on the loose and it is a bit of a horror film, it's also a bit of a bit of politics, really, between the, you know, Chief Brody, the mayor of the town, who's like, you know, we've got to keep her open at all costs. And basically, it builds into that crescendo where they leave the beaches open, and obviously get the bit where the boat gets overturned and the fella gets eaten, and then they have to go out on the boat and kill the shark. But I could go on about it. Before I say, what are your thoughts on Jaws as a film?
Yeah, I haven't seen it for a very long time, to be honest, but I'm do a rewatch. It's one of them films I've got on my rewatch list, but I do remember quite a bit about it. I mean, it's a brilliant film, but like you said, like going into the last 2 movies, it's quite realistic as well. I mean, I done my top 10 terrifying films the other day, and this was on it because this stopped me going into the water for years, and even when I'm on holiday now,
I still won't go in.
yeah, I don't blame you, mate. But like my mum and dad used to say to me, "Oh, it's all way out. It's the sharks aren't this close to the shore, but that kid at the start gets taken out right by the shore. So, there's like 20 minutes in or whatever it is. But yeah, it's a brilliant film, and you know what else is quite creepy in this? I feel when he's talking, telling that story on the boat, the other two, about when like the sharks picked them off one by one. Is it? I mean, that's quite haunting when you hear him talk about it and the way he talks about it. The acting's perfect, but yeah, it's a brilliant film, sure, Jaws, and I don't know if you mentioned it then, Andy, but like obviously, the iconic theme tune and the cameras going towards.
Scariest, yeah.
Yeah. Any
John
thoughts on that
Williams.
theme tune?
Yeah, John Williams, obviously, he's done so many great ones. But if you're in the water and someone starts, straight away you start turning, you look. I think it's the most perfect piece of film. There's obviously, obviously I loved Indiana Jones there, but I think that's saved by John Williams as well, and that's iconic. But Jaws is the building of fear and tension in it with using the music is perfect, and in the different ways he does it. When the shark turns away, it goes softer. When it gets more intense, faster. I think that's why it's such a perfect film, because I think that music fits so well with the build of the tension and the fear of the shark coming. And you talked about the Indianapolis scene there, so that's a real life true story. Is 900 men went into the water and only 300 men came out. And I think Robert Shaw wrote that part of the script, because the script was a mess. But I think Robert Shaw as Quint is such a brilliant performance, and he based it off of a real life fella who was very much like that. And I think with him, Brody, and Richard Dreyfuss, I think it's a perfect cross balance of different types of character that all come together. I think the boat scenes are so great, the three of them in the boat. But yeah, the music, the direction, the fact that it was such a nightmare to shoot for Spielberg and nearly lost his mind. I think it's just a perfect film, and I can watch it over. I watch it over and over again. It's for me, it's my favorite film ever.
Yeah, I think this was the one that put Spielberg on the map, wasn't it? If I remember correctly, this is like that propelled him into stardom, basically, and being one of the best directors of all time. And some might argue this is still his best film, and I'm sure you agree with that. But
I think it is, yeah, and I think it is the film that started the summer blockbuster as well. People did never have films on the summer because a lot of people went away in America, and this did like $300 million or whatever, and that was the changing of how. And now all films, well, some films are in spring more so now, but that was the change in terms of Jaws brought about that change. Yeah, it's just an iconic film.
Yeah, and just quickly, I'll actually say it's a simple idea as well, effectively made into a brilliant movie, isn't it? Just shark on the seaside, but that he made it into something fantastic and genius movie. So, you got anything else you want to add on Jaws, mate, or should we?
No, we'll wrap up there. I think we've gone for that. I think obviously the iconic films, and Spielberg obviously still around directing now. Some great films he's done, and obviously that was, as you pointed out, it was his first big hit. He did Jewel, which is a TV film, which is actually quite similar to Jaws. It's about a truck that's chasing a man down the highway. It's actually quite. And he did Sugarland Express as well before Jaws. But Jaws, yeah, was his first big budget film. Yeah.
Well, overall, what I'd say is the 70s has got just some fantastic films, hasn't it? I mean, them 10 we mentioned there. I mean, I haven't seen Papillon, but I will take your word for it. I think we could do this on another 10. There was that, when I looked up 70s films, there was so many more I could have mentioned, like Dog Day Afternoons. There was so many great films, and I just think it's a great era for movies. And, people will argue the 80s is the best, the 90s is the best, but this is in the conversation, I feel, definitely. And I just, like we said, we love the rawness of it and stuff. It's just a fantastic era, isn't it?
Yeah, it's before the MTV. If you look at films in the 80s, it's very MTV-ish. There's like music, and it's much more glossy. I think the 70s. There's only a couple of films that are really crossed into the 80s. The Vert with Paul Newman in the 80s is a very 70s film, but the rest of them feel very 80s. And I think it's hard to. I don't think there'll ever be a film that's like I think in the early 90s. When there's a lot of indie films like Pulp Fiction stuff, they were sort of like those 70s films, but they still had that gloss that the 70s film didn't have. I think it's a lot. It's the time before. I think it's the last time directors really had, you know, the authority to go do their vision. I think it's very controlled now. Obviously, we're very much in the blockbuster era, but it's just my favourite era of films. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this, everyone. You know, what did you think of Andy coming on the channel? I'm sure you all enjoyed his thoughts. Very knowledgeable on films as well as football, I feel. And it's up to you, mate. But if the viewers want you on again, would you like to come on and talk about a different era or anything like that? I mean, did you want to see us talk about the 80s or?
I'd do the 80s, I'd do the 90s, I'd do the 60s. You know, I love films. I've always tried to support yourself. I think you're doing good work. I can see all those DVDs behind you, the Godfather there, the series there.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, if you ever want me to come back on, I'll certainly come back on.
Yeah, I just want to say as well before we end it, thank you very much, mate, for always sharing my videos on Twitter and stuff. It means the world, mate, honestly. And yes, that is it, everyone. Where can we find you, Andy? Do you want me to leave your Twitter description underneath, or?
Yeah, if you want to, it's at El Pavotti FTBL on Twitter. You know, it's mostly football, unfortunately, but you do get the odd film thoughts sometimes.
Yeah, so if you want to Andy's thoughts on football, trust me, you want to if you like football. Get on his Twitter handle. I'll leave it in the description. Thanks so much, everyone. Cheers, Andy, for coming on. If you enjoyed the video, guys, let us know underneath. I'll reply to you all, I promise. If you want to see more of Andy, let me know. And anything else you want us to talk about if he does come on again. But looks like he might do the 80s. You never know. Thanks, everyone. Take it all easy. And I'll see you all in the next video. See you later, Andy.
Bye, mate.